All right, so this is going to be our last video on the Renaissance, and our topic here is going to be on the Northern Renaissance. So our topic here is on the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance is a Renaissance, and we're going to have a lot of the same foundational things that happen uh, in the Italian Renaissance also happen here in the Northern Renaissance. They're just going to be slightly different. The initial causes of the Renaissance are going to happen here. They're just going to happen here differently enough that we're going to get a different result in the northern part of Europe as we do in Italy. So, when we're thinking about the Renaissance, remember the ideas are still starting in Italy. So the ideas that we're talking about are still these same Italian Renaissance ideas, and they're going to happen for a lot of the same reasons. They're just going to happen slightly differently here. So, for instance, new ideas about art slowly diffuse to Northern Europe. And just to give you a geographic idea of where we're talking about, we're looking primarily at the Germanic states, like in the Holy Roman Empire. We're also looking at parts of Austria, Czechia, maybe into the Netherlands. So that's kind of where we're thinking about here, the northern part of Europe. So new ideas about art are going to diffuse. We're going to see the same ideas about individuality. So these things are going to emerge in Northern Europe. But it's going to look a little differently up there than it does in Italy. Another way that ideas are going to spread is through the printed word. So ideas are also going to spread through printed material. So the printing press is invented in the early 1450s in Germany. And that's going to kind of supercharge the diffusion of new ideas throughout Europe and really throughout the rest of the world. We'll talk a lot more about the printing press when we talk about the Reformation, which will be our next big topic of discussion after we finish the Renaissance. So we'll look at the printing press along with the impact of Luther's printed word when we get to the Reformation. Just note that the printing press and the Renaissance are kind of happening at roughly the same time, and the Reformation will take full use of the printing press when we get there. So let's tell the story of the Renaissance one more time. But this time we're going to do it in a different place where the starting situation is different than what we see in Italy. So most of what we're going to be talking about here is going to be in kind of Central Europe. And if we want a geographical signpost, we'll just say kind of the area of modern Germany. That's where we're going to be looking. Now, when we think about what started the Renaissance in Italy, it is the same thing that's going to start the Renaissance up here. So we're still going to be looking at the plague. The plague impacts this area too. So the plague impacts this area just like it did Italy. But the impact was not nearly as bad. The impact was not nearly as bad here as it was in Italy, and that's for a couple of reasons. This area is not as densely populated. There are fewer big cities here than in Italy. So Italy is pretty much jam-packed with big cities. You're not going to see as many big cities in Central Europe. There's also less trade and less contact, contact with merchants. So there's less trade. There's not no trade. They still trade, but there's less contact with merchants. There's less trade here. So the impact of the plague is there. There is an impact, but it's not nearly as bad as what we would see in Italy. And so as a result of this, we see some small changes to the Renaissance. So for one, there's less animosity towards the church. In Italy, people actively blamed the church for not protecting them. So you'd go to church and you would pray for your life or the life of your family or other loved ones, and they'd still die, and you'd feel as if the church had abandoned you. People died in Germany too, but not to the same extent. So there was less animosity towards the church. They didn't want to get rid of the church entirely. They didn't want to break with the church, but they also weren't entirely happy with the church either. So there was just less animosity towards the church. It doesn't mean that we're not also going to see humanism, though. So we are going to see a type of humanism here directed at reforming the church. And we call this Christian humanism. So if we think about this as a slight difference between what we're seeing in Italy, Christian humanism wants to reform the church. They want you to use your talents with the church. Italian humanism wants you to take the gifts that the church gave you and then go out into the world and do cool things with them. This humanism wants you to use your cool things, but use them for the church or in the glory of the church. So we want to reform the church rather than break with it and be independent. So we want the church to be better, and as people with individual talents and abilities, we can make the church better rather than do it independently of the church, like we would see in Italy. We're also going to see theorists, like philosophers. Just like we did in Italy, So we could think of a guy like Castiglione or Machiavelli or even Da Vinci as like theorists or philosophers of the Italian Renaissance. They're also theorists of the Northern Renaissance. And the guy that we need to pay attention to here is a guy named Desiderius Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus. Erasmus wrote a book called In Praise of Folly. And basically, folly is like silliness or stupidity. And what Erasmus is doing is he's kind of sarcastically praising bad people. So it's sarcastic praise of people doing the wrong things. And the people that he unloads on the most are priests that he believed were not devout or pious enough. Like people who were priests for the perks, not for the work. So he's kind of attacking priests that aren't doing their job. So again, instead of breaking with the church and being your own person, Erasmus is saying we need to get rid of the priests that are bad at their job and make sure that those who become priests are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. Again, like in Italy, there is a focus on education and learning. There is a focus on learning here in the northern part of Europe too. However, the focus here is on practical skills. We're going to focus on practical skills. So in Italy, we're going to learn the humanities. In the northern part of Europe, we're going to focus on practical applications of things. So we're going to look at the law, medicine, theology, which is the study of religion. So things that we can actively use, the law, medicine, fixing the church, rather than these kind of things that are meant to be soulful or examine humanity, like the humanities here. So we're going to, instead of looking at poetry or history or speech, things where we can kind of examine who we are as people, we're going to focus on practical things. And we see the same kinds of trends in art. So we're going to see trends in art as well. Now, we're going to see less Greco-Roman influence, but we're going to see the same kind of focus on individuality and religion. So here are two examples of Northern Renaissance art. So we're not going to look at a lot of examples because we're just kind of doing a brief comparison. But here is one example of Renaissance art. This is by Rembrandt, one of the most famous, recognizable painters, Rembrandt van Rijn, who was Dutch. And this is the Return of the Prodigal Son. So this is a Bible story, just like Da Vinci painted The Last Supper. So this is Rembrandt. And this is the Return of the Prodigal Son. You might be able to hear my cat in the background here. So this is a story from the Bible. But what's notable about this is a story that's been told a lot through painting. But what's notable here is the individuality of the characters in it. Like, you can't see the prodigal son's face, but you can see his sense of relief at being accepted back home by his father. You can see the sense of, like, love and understanding on his father's face. You can see the look of concern on his brothers here. So there's a sense of individuality here. Each one of these characters has an emotional connection to the story, and Rembrandt portrays that here. But here is maybe the most famous Northern Renaissance painting of all time. This is known as the Arnolfini portrait. And so this is by another Dutch painter named Jan van Eyck. And this is called the Arnolfini portrait. Now, this is a wedding portrait. This guy wanted a portrait of his marriage. So this is in celebration of his marriage. I know that the lady looks pregnant, but she's not. She's holding up all of these folds of her dress, and it kind of makes her look pregnant, but she's not. It's just the style of dress at the time. And you can really get an idea of who these people are. Now, if you're watching this, I would really recommend that you find this painting. I just found it on Wikipedia, and you can enlarge the painting, and there is so much intricate detail in this painting that you can learn a very lot of stuff about these people's lives, or at least what they wanted you to know about their lives. So, for instance, behind this guy, there's a couple of oranges. Now, to you and me, an orange is a pretty common fruit, but in the 1400s in Northern Europe, you had to be very wealthy to find an orange. Also of note is that this is one of the noble houses of the Netherlands is the House of Orange. And so this might be a subtle reference to the House of Orange. Their little dog looks like a regular little dog. I mean, it looks like a dog that you or I might see in our daily lives. But they painted this dog in their portrait too. The fact that they have a little dog like this indicates that they're rich, that they can afford to feed a little pet like this simply for companionship. Doesn't look like this dog does anything other than just, be a dog. The detail work in the chandelier, in this mirror. So if you zoom in on the mirror, you actually see the same room, but in reverse. And because it's a curved mirror, Van Eyck had to put the curvature of the mirror in the painting here. And so it's like a very miniature version of the same painting. So there's a lot of study of this painting. We could probably talk about all the stuff that art historians have found in this painting. It could probably talk about it for days. But this is another example of Northern Renaissance art. It's a little bit more restrained. It's more day-to-day stuff, but you still get this sense of individuality and wealth because this guy had a lot of money to be able to afford a painting like this. So what we've done here is kind of take the same story that we've been telling over the last 3 videos about the Italian Renaissance and kind of tell a similar but slightly different story about the Northern Renaissance. So this is what we need to know about the Renaissance. Our next big unit of study will be on the Reformation, where we take a lot of these Renaissance ideas and we're going to expand upon them into just about every facet of European life. The Renaissance was really just an intellectual movement that affected maybe the top 1 or 2% of people in Europe. The Reformation is going to take some of these ideas, add to them, and make it affect everyone in Europe. No one in Europe is going to be unaffected by the Reformation. Everyone in Europe is going to be touched by the Reformation in one way, shape, or form. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at its causes, its key events, and its effects on modern Europe. So with that being said, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.